Welcome back to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. My name is Derek Brown, and on this week's video, we're going to talk about 8 players that consensus needs to be higher on, and all this glorious research I've already done. It is live right now on FantasyPros.com in the primer, so go check it out right now, read up, get ready, set your lineups. Let's talk about these 8 players. All right, first guy up here is Bo Nix. And no, I was not a giant Bo Nix believer coming into the season, but what is he doing lately? And we should care about it. He is putting up fantasy points. QB 15 right now in ECR on FantasyPros.com. He's had QB1 outings in 3 of his last 4 games. QB 8, QB 9, and last week he blew the doors off as the QB2 in fantasy. And again, what does he get this week? A Baltimore Ravens secondary that can be had by every single quarterback this year with a pulse. They are giving up the most passing yards per game and the most passing touchdowns. Get Bo Nix into your lineups. All right, out of the quarterback realm and into tight ends, got to talk about Noah Fant. Tight end 19 on Fantasy Pros right now in ECR. And look, whether or not DK Metcalf plays, I think you should be higher than consensus on Noah Fant. And all this comes down to the usage lately and the matchup. Noah Fant sits week 6, almost a 12% target share. He has been having almost 2 yards per route run, 1.97. That's a fantastic clip. So what do we want to talk about? Not only is a great matchup this week for him, he has been uber efficient over the last few weeks. Now let's get to the matchup. The Rams have been gashed by tight ends, allowing the 4th most receiving yards to the position and the 2nd most fantasy points per game. Noah Fant, especially if you are struggling at tight end this year, Noah Fant is somebody that might be on the waiver wire and you need to consider for your lineups this week. All right, well, we discussed one Seahawk. Let's bring up another. So this is especially true if DK Metcalf is out, but again, much like Noah Fant, even if he plays, I'm telling you right now that, look, Tyler Lockett can have a big game. And we haven't seen that out of Tyler Lockett yet. He hasn't been on any of these videos yet this year. And yes, people were talking about him okay last week versus Buffalo. That was a terrible matchup. He gets a wonderful matchup this week. And it's going to push targets in his direction, not only because, okay, what happens to DK Metcalf or not, even if DK plays and he's not 100%. The Rams have been extremely good against slot wide receivers. They have struggled against perimeter wide receivers, giving up the 5th highest fantasy points per game to that position and the 5th most receiving yards per game. Tyler Lockett, also, we look at the coverage shell, this gives him a bump. The Rams have the 8th highest single high rate this year, and Tyler Lockett, his yards per route run, has climbed to almost 1.8. And that's notable because we want to talk about good matchup, maybe more efficiency out of Lockett. Depending on what happens with DK Metcalf, targets could get bumped in his direction. You need to consider Tyler Lockett this week, especially if you're dealing with a lot of injuries for your fantasy team. All right, I promise, no more Seahawks on this video, but I gotta mention Chase Brown. He barely sneaks in on the list this week as the RB21 in ECR, but I'm telling you, he could be an RB1 this week. For Chase Brown, what have we seen since week 6? He owns this backfield. 74% of the rushing play snaps, 79% of the red zone snaps. So, the Bengals getting close. It's Chase Brown touchdown time, baby. Joe Burrow coming out and talking about the media that they got to run the ball better moving forward. And I think that starts this week versus the Raiders, who are giving up the 4th highest missed tackle rate and a lot of production to zone runs, which have been 55% of Chase Brown's volume, giving up the 6th highest yards per carry to zone runs and the 9th highest success rate. Get Chase Brown into your lineup. All right, before we break into the top 4 of this video, if you are juggling multiple fantasy football teams and feeling a tad bit overwhelmed, Fantasy Pros is here to help you simplify things with the Fantasy Pros Multi-League Assistant. You can see the latest news, notes, and rankings for every single player across all of your teams. It's all in one spot, making your path to victory clearer and easier. Dive in and let us help you dominate all of your leagues with the Multi-League Assistant at fantasypros.com/myplaybook or on the Fantasy Football My Playbook app. Download it today. Okay, staying on the running back position, let's get to the top 4 of this video, and I'm going to talk about a guy here, and this is assuming Tyrone Tracy Jr. is out this week because he's in concussion protocol, probably doesn't play. So I understand the ranking for this player is going to go up, but I don't think it's going to catch up enough right now for Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary is the RB31 in FantasyPros ECR right now. And what have we seen out of Singletary? I think people don't understand how good he has been on a per-touch basis. Amongst 43 qualifying backs, Singletary is 11th in missed tackles forced per attempt and 6th in yards after contact per attempt. So we get a great matchup. You get Singletary back in a workhorse role this week if Tracy Jr. is out. And again, this all comes down to if Tyrone Tracy is out, because last week we saw him take over the backfield. So again, some context here. But the matchup, if Singletary gets the run of this backfield, he's going to be an RB2. Heck, he might be an RB1 this week if he pops off. Washington's run defense has been that bad. They're giving up the second highest explosive run rate and the 8th most rushing yards per game. Consider Devin Singletary as a flex play or maybe an RB2 for your lineups for week 9. All right, well, let's keep the running back love flowing. And I'm going to talk about a guy that, look, I know that everybody might have gotten burned last week with Rico Dowdle getting sick, running 102 fevers, and getting ruled out right before kickoff that day. I get it. I understand it. You need to go back to the well. Zeke Elliott didn't show anything last week. Neither did Dalvin Cook, who was tearing it up in practice. This is Rico Dowdle's backfield, and I think he cements that this week moving forward. You have an Atlanta run defense that can be run on, and we're going to see it this week in a high-scoring game. Atlanta has allowed the 12th most rushing yards per game and the 6th highest missed tackle rate. So for Rico, Dallas knows they got to get established the run at some point. They cannot continue to put everything, all of it, on Dak Prescott's shoulders, although a lot of it's going to be there. In a high-scoring game, they can run the ball and do it with success. Get Rico Dowdle into your flex spot this week. All right, for the final 2 players on this list, we're going to go back to the wide receiver position. I got to talk about a player that I have been high on since NFL draft season. Loved him as a prospect, didn't understand why he went undrafted, but now he's getting opportunity, and the NFL is seeing that they were wrong. That is Jalen Coker, wide receiver 57 in ECR and FantasyPros right now. And I'm not telling you he's going to be a wide receiver 2. I'm not telling you he's going to be a strong, target-earning wide receiver 2 this week. But can he be a flex play? Can he be a wide receiver 3? I absolutely think that this week. So rankings are low on him. I get it. Bryce Young's got to throw the ball to somebody. And I think Jalen Coker is going to demand targets in this passing attack this week. What have we seen out of Coker? Since week 5, earning the starting job in the slot, almost an 11% target share, almost 2 yards per route run. So he's been very efficient with the work he's been given or he's earned. And the matchup is awesome this week. The Saints cannot stop any slot wide receivers. Just the truth. They're giving up the 8th most fantasy points per game to slot wide receivers and the 3rd most receiving yards per game. So inside looks, underneath looks, easy looks dialed up for Bryce Young to pepper Jalen Coker this week. It's going to pop off. Consider him for your flex spot. All right, so the number 1 player for this week. I know everybody says, okay, I've got a Green Bay Packer on my roster. I don't know who to start. Is it a Romeo Doubs week? Is it a Christian Watson week? Is it Jaden Reed? I think it's pretty easy this week, people. It's Jaden Reed and it's Romeo Doubs. Wide receiver 37 in ACR on FantasyPros right now. In the 2 meetings last year, the Lions and Green Bay Packers played. And this is important, so hear me clearly. They utilize single high at almost 60% of their snaps. Why does that matter, Derek? Why do you bring up all this coverage data? Because the Green Bay Packers care about this. This is how you find out if you've been reading the primer the entire year, and then this is how we find out which Packers wide receiver is going to pop off. And this week, it's Jaden Reed and it's Romeo Doubs. Against single high, and that's what I think the Packers see a lot of this week. Romeo Doubs this year, 22% target per route run rate. That's 2nd on the team. He is 1st in yards per route run. So the most efficient player on the team versus single high, as well as he has a 30.1% first read share against this coverage shell matchup. And Detroit has been giving it up to perimeter wide receivers, allowing the 11th highest fantasy points per game. Get Romeo Doubs into your lineups and enjoy all the fantasy points this week. All right, everyone, that is my 8 picks from the primer. Head over to FantasyPros.com. Read the primer right now. Again, it's always updated, people. So check back Saturday, check back Sunday morning, dive into all of the analysis I got there for you every single week, and use the multi-league assistant. Help us help you win all of your matchups for week 9. I'll see you in week 10.